Peace and respect to you all. Welcome to Demolished Doctrine, the beginning of the end of religion. Yes, a religious channel talking about the end of religion. Tonight's guest, Mr. Jamie Russell. Jamie Russell, tell them all a little bit about yourself.
I'm very attractive and I'm 40 years
You
old.
are.
So that's why I don't go on camera usually, but it's too distracting. But just kidding.
And humble.
Yes, the most humble man that ever lived, in fact. More humble than most.
Apparently.
Well, hey man, it's just facts. No, yeah, I have a channel and I just talk about theology and some philosophy and doctrine and what the Bible says or whatever, and defend my denominational beliefs, which are Seventh-day Adventist. I don't think I'm as conservative part of that group as some people are, as how people are often perceived. I don't think, but I do strongly hold to those fundamental beliefs that what it means to be a Seventh-day Adventist, which is really just kind of a conservative Wesleyan Protestant, sort of denomination that started in the 1800s. And the main doctrines are different, that we keep the weekly Sabbath on the original Sabbath. And we think dead people are actually dead and they're awaiting the resurrection, so they're not alive in the intermediate state. And then we believe hell is annihilationism, and so the final destruction of everything that doesn't belong in God's creation. And then we have particular, the other major thing would be the particular interpretation of Daniel and Revelation, and we believe that the end of the age is near, and that we're in the quote unquote time of the end, which is a phrase from Daniel 8 and other places in Daniel 12. So that's kind of a big deal, I guess, too. But besides that, we believe the core essentials of, what people call mere Christianity, Trinity, things like that, right? Salvation by justification through faith, just basically a Wesleyan theology with a mix of other views that have existed in the church, except for the development of Daniel, which didn't really ever exist anyways throughout church history. So yeah, that's about it.
Development of Daniel. What do you mean by that?
Well, if you look at church history, like obviously a lot of scholars will tell you that like there's no unified belief. For one, we know, if we believe the Bible is true, let's say, right, that it's actually predicting things that came true. And that's why I remain a Christian, by the way. It's because of the prophecies about Jesus' first coming. So I feel like I can trust the other prophecies in there that are connected to it in Daniel 8 and 7 and 9 throughout the rest of the book. So no one through church history had an idea because I would say things that the prophecy were saying hadn't happened yet. There was from Daniel 7 in particular. So, and they talk about this, their interpretation of the kingdoms that succeeded from Daniel's time in 600 BC and how it predicted that. There was a lot of discussion there. And then they recognized from Daniel 2 that Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And Rome, of course, is the empire of the world when Jesus shows up. And then there's indication that transforms into, because it is the final kingdom before. That's what Daniel 2 says. It describes the four kingdoms first there in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And then the last part of the vision is that a rock cut out without hands coming from heaven strikes the foot of the statue and then fills the whole earth. And it's an everlasting kingdom.
I refer to those as meteorites.
Yeah, sure. That motif is used in Revelation too. But the point is that the four kingdoms are connected to historical facts that show when Jesus came in the beginning, and the last kingdom is Rome. And so then the everlasting kingdom's set up. But then if you believe that there's a second coming of Jesus, how do you make that work? And there's indication in Daniel and Revelation that suggests Rome transforms, the three. There's a lot of details I won't go into, but just that somehow you have to make that work, right? A lot of people say it was a false prophecy. They thought the world was going to end right away. Therefore, it never happened. So Jesus is a false apocalyptic prophet. But if you actually look carefully at how Revelation continues the vision from Daniel 7 and Revelation 13, and you see its sweeping nature of regarding God's sovereignty and such. You know, different schools have emerged, but when you do that and you take a consistent flow through the kingdoms and you consider the fact that you'd think the prophecy would describe something to do with this whole huge time period from when Jesus ascended until his second coming, but everyone seems to think that that's a huge gap without telling us anything, and they forget what happened in history. And so it's really kind of disappointing.
And by forget what happened in history, you mean the several large gaps?
Well, I would say the Roman Empire became the church, and this power is considered,
Yes,
the great whore of Babylon, right? And it comes out of Rome, and the way it's described is, in my opinion, unmistakably the system of what the Roman Catholic Church became in the Middle Ages, and murdered a lot of people. Wanted to have control and mediate between God and men in a way that God didn't intend, in my opinion. Or it's kind of a hard question to say intend. Like, God predicted what would happen and he says it was a bad thing. And of course, the Roman Church merges with the it takes civil power, right? And then it starts killing heretics. And the text says that, and she's drunk on the blood of the saints. Well, Rome had civil power from basically 538 BC or AD, and 1260 years later is when Napoleon took the Pope off of his throne, basically, and took over France and took him out of his commission. That's exactly 1260 years that the Roman power that's what papacy means. It means the church merged with civil power, which is a no-no according to Jesus, I would say.
And 1260 is, of course, months and 3.5 years, which is why you mentioned that.
Yeah, most people recognize in Revelation 10, 11, and I think 12 and 13 mention the time period in different ways. 1260, which is 3.5 years on the lunar calendar, and then 42 months, or 1260 days, or 3.5 years, and a time times and half a time starting in Daniel 7.
Very good. That's all of them. You covered it. That was it. It doesn't use any other phraseology. That was all of them. Okay, so you said something actually that was really worrisome to me. You said, and I just want to remind you of it and ask you to recall that, so you can say it however you like, so I'm not, accidentally strawmanning your position or something. I would not be a Christian if.
I don't
said
remember
something
what I
like, if it were not the case that certain prophecies had been fulfilled, or you were saying something like that.
Oh, I was just saying that that's one of the major reasons I retain belief in the Bible, is because of the accuracy of the prophecies that foretold when Jesus would come, according to, either the decree would come forth from the Second Empire. When you look at the text carefully of Daniel 9, or actually I guess it would be, in Daniel 9. And so from a decree, and then when you look at the New Testament text, especially in like Luke 4, I think there's the writer of that gospel, if that's the right one I'm thinking of, it talks about right before it sets up the scene where Jesus starts his ministry, which is a highly significant scene where it says it describes the people of Israel being in expectation, and they're wondering if John the Baptist is the Messiah. So they're around the right time, according to Daniel's prophecy. There's indication that the people are expecting the Messiah, and we know this historically from other documents too. And then, of course, that's what he puts in there and then he gives the narration of Jesus being baptized by John the Baptist. John doesn't want to do it, and he says, "Do it to fulfill all righteousness," which seems to be a phrase from Daniel's prophecy. And then God speaks from heaven, and he's anointed with the Holy Spirit. And then he goes into the wilderness and is tempted for 40 days, being filled with the Holy Spirit. Then he goes into the synagogue and reads the scroll of Isaiah, which is about the suffering servant that was to come, that would be a light to the Gentiles. Yeah. So that whole scene is highly significant, and it gives you a marker for the date too. And it tells you, one of them says he was about 30 years old, and one of them says, I forget, the 14th year or something. I forget the number of Tiberius's reign. And so when you correlate that to the calendar and you look at the possible decrees to rebuild the temple from, from that when they were in captivity, that it's exactly according to the text that Jesus shows up and starts his ministry and then dies 3.5 years later. And of course, that the New Testament teaches that brings the new covenant by his death, which makes the atonement for iniquity. That is one of the things listed that must be done in the 70 weeks of years there. So, and there's
I
many
can't
other
see how
texts in it.
No, go ahead. Just you paused.
No, that's it. That's it.
Nuh-uh. You paused, and I spoke in the middle of a sentence, and I have no idea what you. And I want to know what you said.
I was just I was just throwing in. There's many other texts, prophetic texts from Isaiah, especially in Isaiah, which if you look carefully in the New Testament, the writers are narrating scenes of Jesus operating as Yahweh with the people,
right?
Like in Isaiah 42, the Sermon on the Mount, Isaiah 53, the way everything ends up playing out, what he says to the Pharisees, like when he chases out the money changers and says,
Heck, at one point he calls himself the father of the nations,
right? Which is a prophecy about Emmanuel, right? Too. So
right.
There's so many. It's amazing. Like my favorite is when he says, it's somewhere in Matthew, and he's chasing out the money changers, and he's like saying, "You made my father's house a den of thieves." So he's like mad because people are exploiting people in order for them to, have their sacrifices and offerings. And so in some sense he's mad because people are not being able to, they're being exploited, and so he wants them to be doing those offerings. And then a couple chapters later, it says in the same book, the same writer, he says, you see Jesus, it says something like he knows they're gonna arrest him and kill him or whatever. And then when that happens, it sets it up in the context by saying that. And then he says, it's one of those, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how you killed the prophets between the altar and the whatever it was, the temple and the altar." And he's like, "How I would have loved to gather you, but you would not come to me." And he's like, "See, I leave your house to you desolate." All of a sudden, when he's about to die, he knows his time has come and they're going to kill him, and he's willingly letting them do it. He says, all of a sudden, it's not his father's house anymore. He says, "I leave your house to you desolate," although that could be taken as the father's house. But the point is, he does leave the temple to them desolate because he's going to die. It's really interesting. It's obviously, even if you don't think if you have a different view, or you don't think the text is historical or whatever, I think you still have to say the narrative is setting that idea up in some way, I would say. And by the way, we can go wherever you want. We don't have to talk about this. I don't care.
Yes, you're always very nice. Okay, so I'm not doing street epistemology with you, but what percentage of your faith is based in historical verification through the fulfillment of prophecies?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. That's why I said it the way I did. It's like, it's kind of like it's not the basis of my faith in a sense, right? But it's like it's always there. It's like a steadfast reality of the facts to me. So it's kind of like I don't know, like a security blanket, I guess I would say. But it's not really like all I care about, right?
Right.
You might get
if I had that position, I'd have no faith, because I think other than the 6 days of creation up to man arriving on the scene are the only historical parts of the Bible. That the rest of it is only prophetic. Never mind the fact that it's written as poetry, and it's told in the tradition of the time and place of the people who received it. That we're Abrahamic, we're a derivative of a derivative, actually. because the original Judaism was lost for some 1,000 years. And in that, it's only speaking about the end times, which is why Daniel, and in fact, I would say everything in it, is and can also be found in the book of Revelation. Whereas to say, Daniel 9, these things happened, but were, I guess you would say something like foreshadowings, something like that.
Well, that's kind of the traditional futurist view, and I have a somewhat like the futurist view in that I think I agree with them on certain things, but not on a lot of things. So my view would be more like, I guess I can't show you that. I would, or maybe no, I can't. I have like a slide where it shows the different views and how they kind of map onto history. And so my view is like that it's talking about just a consistent flow through history from Daniel onward through till the Messiah comes and then till his second coming. But regarding your but certain that I think there's a time of trouble to come. And so I think the things described after Revelation 13 are talking about future events for sure. In our future, I mean. And I think Daniel 7 is being kind of recapitulated, partially at least. It's being used in Revelation 13. But of course, Revelation bounces around. I would say like Revelation 12 would be essentially sweeping the whole gamut of a pre-fall. I take it to be a fall in heaven of Satan, but then him also being cast down at Jesus' accomplishment in the first century. And it's describing the woman who I take to be God's people persisting through time. And so I think someone will ask, is this woman, because the Catholics try to make it into Mary being ascended into heaven, being the queen of heaven. And so they'll argue for that it's Mary. And the Protestants will argue that
funny to me.
The church, traditionally the Protestants said it was the church, which by that they meant what I mean, which is that it's Israel / God's people is the easiest way to say it. And so I would say, is it Israel? Is it the church? Is it Mary?
Well, actually, I think it switches.
Yes, it's that.
I think it switches context midstream, which you don't normally find something doing. But it goes from like a location of the birth of the infant boy unto the person who gives birth.
Yeah.
So that being the case, I think it's.
Do you take it to be astronomical?
Why didn't it come up? Well, no, not exactly. But referring to this Earth, it's astronomical. But from the point of view and looking down at the planet, not looking from we are so self-centered. We are so proud of ourselves that we have trouble getting, into the third dimension and off of this planet and looking down at it, which actually I think much of it is written that way.
Oh, I hear what you're saying. I would just say, yeah, we have to be careful not to do that. But I would just say that God does indicate that he's going to set up a throne here, like Jesus' throne forever. And God was with man forever on this planet, it suggests to me. And I think he might have
on this planet. That's another point of disagreement we would have.
Okay.
I mean, setting up a throne on the planet doesn't mean Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think because he says, I saw, John says, I saw in heaven. You don't have to take that literally, obviously, but you could take that to be saying he's having a vision based on the what he's seeing in the the zodiac or whatever, right? So because at that time, when you look at the astronomical observatory and you go back to that time over Judea, the Virgin with the waved sheaf offering is there.
Or what you could say, the constellation Virgo, right?
Virgo, yes. And there's a dragon at her feet. There's actually a couple options for the dragon, depending on what version you take. And at that time, the moon was at her feet. In that time period,
there's a severe problem right there.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so if we're in whatever constellation, Virgo, for instance. What that means is, in the geocentric model of the time, what that means is you look past the sun or over the sun at night. And so you look across the sun, and that's the constellation the Earth is in. You know that, right?
Right.
Okay. Now, if the moon were directly below that, what phase of moon would you have?
Okay. Yeah. Right.
You'd
Yeah.
have
The
a
sun and
black,
the moon are opposite.
non-existent moon.
So you're saying because it describes the moon at her feet and also being clothed with the sun, how is that possible? It can't be at the same moment. It has to be at least 12 hours apart, right?
Well, it can't be the topic, is my point. It can't be referring to the constellation.
Well, I would say my opinion, I would just say the way I would take that, right? Because obviously, so is what is said is she's clothed with the sun, which is clearly, I'm not saying it's merely talking about astronomical stuff. I'm just saying that's a
Yeah.
corollary to the meaning of the text. The real meaning is that it's describing God's plan to bring forth the Messiah through the Virgin
Well, yeah,
or whatever,
obviously
right?
that's the point. Yeah.
Right. And so, and the dragon's poised to eat her child. And of course, that's what happened, right? Satan sends Herod to try to kill the innocents so that he can kill the prophesied Messiah that was to
True
come.
story.
And right, that's what it says in the text. So that would suggest to me, whatever it is, some people think it's just a vision. It's not even, that's fine. It doesn't have to be the constellation. My tradition doesn't say that it's this, never thought of it that way. I got this from other places. So I'm not just peddling my church's doctrine per se, right? It seems.
Be okay if you did.
I do to a certain degree because I agree with it, but I don't like check with it before I say something, right? Like I would just say, I found out the other day, by the way, that I believe something that Mrs. White, Ellen White, my prophet, my savior, apparently people tell me, she said
Oh,
that
that's interesting.
she said that verse that where Jesus says they neither marry or given in marriage in the resurrection means that we won't have children anymore. I don't think it means that. I think he's saying
So you're saying you
at
have
the
a
time of the
disagreement with
resurrection, people won't be doing that. But if we're going to live forever, restored in some sense, I would say on earth, but wherever,
yeah.
it seems like God's original intention was for us to have children because he implemented that sort of idea before there was even just theologically in the text before the fall. So God creates humans to make babies, and there's nothing bad happening yet. So babies aren't like that's what we do because we're sinners or something. It's like no, babies are to grow the family because that's what God wants, a family. That's my ultimate view. God, what is the point of everything? God
wants us to have family too.
love.
Yeah.
He
Right
makes
on.
us image bearers and he wants to expand love. That is the ultimate goal, to have a relationship with other image bearers, and then more love can happen. And a family is a picture of that, a healthy, sort of family, a picture. So,
well, this is probably the most woo thing I say, but it's just beautiful and a romantic idea that I also think is true. You can observe that we're the only critter on this planet with this level of consciousness and depth of emotion. So, I say something like, I had this dog, it really loved me. But what does that mean to the dog? Well, it means it obeyed me. It means it appreciated my attention, the fact that I fed it, things like this. Like we had a good relationship. Did it love me the way that I can love another human? No, I just don't think so. I don't think anything even close to that. And in that way, in that definition of love, since there are things that can be emotionless, then I think it's a good possibility we are the only true expression of love in all of the universe. We may be love. I know that's romantic.
yeah, no, I think no, I am a romantic. I'm wistfully a romantic or whatever. And I'm not ashamed of it because at the end of the day, what else has meaning? It seems to me, although, well, I would just say I agree with what you're saying, animal, but I do think people don't give enough credence to a scale of emotions. But yes, humans, I think, because we can think about thinking, meaning we can deliberate, we make real decisions. I believe in all,
Right.
libertarian free will, which I think is critical for having the image of God in some sense, whatever that actually means or looks like. But it seems to me we can think about what we think about, and that to me means
Yes, we
an
do.
ability that animals don't have. But they
No, they
do
don't.
seem to have, like, I saw a video, as I was going to say, is that the other day, and like people say that animals don't have emotions. I've seen like dogs crying when they go to the grave of the person they had, and they won't leave, and the family's trying to call the dog to the car, and the dog's like whimpering and sitting on the grave of the person that was their caretaker. And I've seen another funny one was the lady comes home and there's a mess, and there's 3 dogs, and 2 of them are the same kind of dog. I forget what kind it was, a bigger dog. And one of them's sitting there really attentive and like kind of nervous. And the other one's like, just like, looks like he's walking on eggshells sort of thing. And it's just, and the woman's like, who did it? Who did it? And the one that's like clearly guilty, the other dog's looking at the woman behind the camera, and the other dog slowly like gets an idea, and you see it like the gears turning, and when the other dog's not looking, he slowly lifts his paw and touches the other dog's face when she's asking who did it. And then the dog that didn't do it, that was all nervous, when the paw hits his face, he like sharply looks at the other dog and like rams him with his head.
Liar.
Yeah, it's funny. So like,
you're
there's
liar.
like
I did not do it.
Yeah, how dare you?
That's pretty funny.
Yeah,
oh gosh, what was I going to ask you? Oh, you so many things so fast. I don't even
know. You brought
know.
something up about the flood thing. I know. I'm sure you were disagreeing with me when I saw you in the chat there after I was closing it down.
The flood.
You were talking about love. You were talking about love just a second ago.
Yeah, I was talking about love. What about the flood?
Well, you were saying you wanted to talk to me. I saw in the comments. I didn't see it live, but I saw it as I was closing.
I mean, we could talk about whatever I was talking about there, and I'd have to go look it up, or just keep going. Like, I mean, I'm having a good time. It looks like the people in the chat are having a good time. And oh, by the way, if it does get, which I can't imagine how with your brain and my brain it would get slow, but should that happen, would it be okay to bring in some of the side chat audience?
Yeah, absolutely.
Say yeah.
One
there's
other
so much.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, straining gnats and swallowing camels. Oh gosh.
Yeah, don't feel nervous about pressing me on anything. I don't mind. You can press me. I don't mind you doing it.
I know you're tough enough, and here's what I think is the difference. Some people believe that there is this objective God, and they're trying to understand it. I think you fall under that category. Some people think that they perfectly agree with God, which means that they're really well aligned, and maybe can't explain how they became so aligned. Maybe, were raised up in the church or just have read the Bible a lot. That second category of person has invented their own God. That's why they always agree. They've never had to bend on anything because they're agreeing with themselves. That same kind of person will get very, very defensive when you challenge their God, because you're not challenging any God, you're challenging them. So it's really easy to tell whether or not a person has invented God or if they think there's an objective God outside of themselves by how defensive they are. Which is not the same thing as me getting pissed when people start committing logical fallacies and I point it out and they do it anyway. It's not the same thing at all.
Absolutely. I agree with you.
To Mitch Lovin, I'm just talking about a different kind of love, not the level of love so much. I mean, I've had dogs that in their way loved me deeply, but I still don't think it's how I would feel about my own child. Peace and respect, Marty.
Some people do.
I hope you would love your own child more than you would some animal.
Well, when you're in the movie theater and an animal dies, everybody whimpers, but when some guy gets killed, they laugh. It's weird.
Yeah, well, yeah, we are desensitized by Hollywood. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, that doesn't prove anything. I'm just saying.
It doesn't. Okay,
But
so I want to point out a gnat and a camel. Um, and I want you to give the answers because I don't want to feel like I'm leading you, but I want to ask the right questions.
well, it's an opportunity to be face reality. So you can the thing you were describing. I know I agree with what you're saying, and that's where when I was talking about, I know like people are scared, right? I'm scared too to a certain degree,
Sure.
and like what you said about like people being fallacious or not, like you being right isn't bad if you are right, but of course
Right.
if you're not right, so it's like you want to be open, but not so open your brain falls out and you can't even grasp anything or hold on to anything. So there's like
Right.
this paradox there, and I struggle with that every day.
I hope we all do. The definition of Israel is to struggle with God. It's literally what it means.
Yeah,
Um,
I love that. I tell people that all the time. You need to wrestle with this. Like, I'm just saying, I don't care. Sometimes I don't care if you're going to agree with me or not. Sometimes I want people to agree with me, but sometimes I'm thinking, that's what I say to people all the time. Like, it's a good thing. I think I did a stream with that Eric on that. Just like, look, it's okay to wrestle with God. It's okay to doubt certain things and consider other things. That's a good thing. I don't think God's like mad at you because you're not affirming the right proposition all of a sudden, because you're being open-minded and not being dogmatic and turning into a burnt nut that hates everybody and says they're going to hell and doesn't have the Holy Spirit because they don't agree with you.
right. Well, that was pretty funny. I gave the beatings will continue a hello, and it didn't come up, so I did it again. Then it came up twice. Weird. Don't know what happened right there. Okay, so here's the gnat and the camel. So I'm only going to give you the camel, of course. Um, have you ever heard me present what I've nicknamed the Sabbath syllogism?
I don't think so.
Okay. So do you know the rules of a formal syllogism? You're familiar, at least basically.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me present the whole thing, and then I'll present it again one piece at a time,
Okay.
and you can argue whatever you argue if you think I'm wrong. Okay. First premise. This is, of course, for anybody who enjoys learning new things, because it's an internal critique. And to talk about this, you don't need to believe it's true. I'm only talking about the logic of it. So it's an internal critique from within the Bible that doesn't speak to its truth value, but still it's a great exercise mentally. All right. So first premise. Um, the God rests the Sabbath from all his creation, because his creation is complete. Second premise, mankind is part of God's creation, and there's promises within the Bible that we will become perfected, and that will be our completion. Third premise, mankind is still on this earth and not perfected. Conclusion, there's been no Sabbath rest of God to this earth. Okay, I'm going to do them one at a time. Feel free to object to anything. God rests the Sabbath day from all of his creation. You are muted if you are speaking.
But sorry, I wanted to let you get through it. I thought you wanted to get through it first.
That's pretty much it. That's
So
I mean, it's summated, but
what you said is true, I think.
okay.
And so I think I've mentioned to you this before, like when we were disagreeing or when I was saying, I like, because I've always found your, I think I think the things you find are really interesting and intriguing and worth sharing with people, that they can take that on and kind of figure out what's going on there, because clearly when they're giving the names to the different rivers and they mean something and it has a narrative in it in some sense, right? Or some sort of idea there. in the
Sure.
progression of like the names translated, for instance. I remember you doing that. And people wanted to say, oh, that's not legitimate. And it's like, no, you just don't have a Hebrew mindset. You're totally clueless. Like, because
You have to adopt that. That's right.
you have to, because that's like, oh, was that a mistake? Was that just a coincidence? Like, this is what
It's a hell of a lot of coincidences. If it was an accident, I don't know how it could be an accident.
Right. So what you were describing about the Sabbath, I would
Yeah.
say yes. I think the creation narrative is in a sense, a theological concept, largely, and in a sense, a prophetic. I take it to be also kind of prophetic of a sweep of history in a sense, right? Because I believe God is telling a love story. He's getting a bride for his son, the one that's sent to the world. You know, he's like the hero story. And so, and he's showing us how to be human, and he's and the language all through the Old Testament and the New about God, Israel or his people being like a bride, and when they rebel, he calls them fornicators, you know, and he uses sexual metaphors, which is really cool regarding, you know, when they're going up the high places and they're not having any underwear on and stuff like that, right? Their skirts
that's
are
why
blocked.
Islam calls non-believers an infidel. They are displaying infidelity.
Yeah.
That's why. Same idea. Yeah.
He makes Hosea marry a prostitute to represent the ways people are being whores to other gods and the
That's
nations.
right. That's why. That's very good. Most people don't catch that.
Yeah, it's like, why is God doing this? This is just, I don't get this. It's like, dude,
It's
God's in control.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, I just think the people who take it too, like, they're like, when they see those little things like that, they think, oh, God's determining everything. And look, there's a sense that he is, right?
Oh,
Sorry,
let's not get into that kind of determinism.
Sabbath
Let's
thing,
not. Neither you nor
pull
I
the
believe
reins
that.
here. Sorry, I get on side trails, man, and it's interesting. Okay, so,
Okay,
so I agree with you.
Okay, second premise. Mankind is part of God's creation, and we are not complete.
Right. True.
Okay. And the conclusion, there's been no Sabbath of God to this earth.
Right. So that's a future event. Hebrews 4 says this. If Joshua could have given them rest, then they would have, you know, whatever. So there remains.
Now, the only thing left to discuss in this, since we agree on all that, and I think it's valid and sound, I've never heard a decent argument against it. It's obviously from the text. The only thing left to discuss in what the Sabbath means is there a difference between the Sabbath for man and the Sabbath for God, in your opinion?
Yeah, so that's kind of where I was going with the Genesis thing. There's hints at this in the, like, there's no evening and morning on that day. For some reason it's missing. And so I take it as a pattern. In other words, so you tend to take it, see that theological idea, and then say, hey, this isn't talking about history, man. It's talking about this prophetic idea of what God's doing. And I'm saying,
don't go too far now. It is talking about history as well, because that's the next thing I was going to bring
okay,
up.
good. Okay,
is
fine.
that the Bible also claims that God did, past tense, rest from his creation. I'm just saying it can't be this planet.
Oh, it can't be what?
It can't be this planet because we're still here.
Okay. Well, okay, so I'll say this. I think, because when you look at the text, right, and he's like, he just says it's like he rested because in it he, you know, he rested from all what he made, and then it's like it's his Sabbath and it's his rest, and it's very like, what's the word, like just really repetitive that it's like God's day, not
it's hammered down several times. Yeah,
he rested because he made everything and it's his day, and he sanctified it and set it apart. So I would just say, I just take that to be kind of this hint at what God's going to do. And and then he does that by doing actual things in history. So in other words, yes, it's hinting at how God's going to, and then we see this in the New Testament, the fulfillment of the Messiah coming, and then they're confused about what he's going to do. And then he's trying to like change them from the inside instead of just, you know, taking the world by force. I would say the Bible goes on to make other clues of that, where it talks about that rest that's to come, right? It's like an already, but not yet. So where are
Right.
you wanting to go with that idea? Because I
Yeah,
agree with
the
you
all
that
but
theology
not
is
yet. It's like if you're 10 years old, but your college is already paid for. Your parents did an educational savings account for you, started when you were born, and it's all paid up, and you're good to go. You're just not old enough for college yet. So that's how you can be. What was that expression you used? That's a biblical quote. Pretty
already,
much
but not yet.
already, but not yet. Yes, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
That's what a
Um,
lot of scholars will say. They in the literature they say that all the time because it's like, is this fulfilled or is it not? And so it's like it's kind
right.
of like you said, that was a great analogy. You could also talk
Yeah, it
about like
is.
a dead man walking, right? When he's going to the gallows, he's a dead man
Right.
walking.
Yeah, he's surely going. He may as well be dead. He's surely dead. Which answers to Brojo, who wrote Colossians 2:9-10 says. Actually, it doesn't say anything. It's not an audible recording. It reads something.
Yeah.
For in Christ lives all the fullness of God in a human body, so you also are complete through your union with Christ. I would point out that if someone had any kind of fundamental misunderstanding about Christ, and by the way, the 12 apostles who lived with him for 3.5 years had fundamental misunderstandings, and they're in the story spelled out what those misunderstandings were. Like they didn't know he was Christ until Peter was the first, for instance. And every time he told a story, they were like, yo, JC, cool story. What's it mean? So they didn't understand. Yet modern Christians think that they understand, which leads me to the conclusion that when it's talking about Christ, it's talking about a set of works or job description. And that this says you, Y-O-U, that's a singular individual person, not everybody who just happens to pick up the Bible. Like, for instance, a non believer can pick up the Bible, read it, and they see this promise. They are obviously being given this promise, right? Wrong. No. It's a single, identical, the word you right there talking to the hero. So at least in my view, there's no problem there, because I believe it's written to the Christ, not to Joe Schmo preacher down the street.
Yeah. Let me say this to not be, I like to be agreeable. So I'm going to just say it like
Well,
this.
don't
I'm
be
going to
overly,
not
of
read into
course.
what you're saying. I'm not going to read into the implications of what you're saying, but what you said is true. Not to say I necessarily agree with all the implications of it per se in the way that you do,
I
but
understand
what
that.
you were saying is absolutely a reality. Like the idea that the Catholics predicted this would happen, that that's why they were trying to lord over everybody with the church's authority. And
Right.
Protestant, they knew that Protestants would splinter into a million pieces, and they do. And a bunch of people zealously go about acting like they know what the Bible's saying, and I think I know enough to say that they're certainly wrong about several things at least, and because of how they argue it. And so that's a problem. What do we do with that, or what should we make of that?
Right. But apparently, humans are good at predicting humans, or at least
Yeah,
those who are practiced at governance are pretty darn good at it.
right.
Okay. So in this Sabbath syllogism, which does show whether a person, wants to respect it, accept it or not, it's still an actual fact. Um, it shows that there's been no Sabbath of God to this earth. And I don't find any differentiation between a Sabbath that we would celebrate and the Sabbath of God. And I wonder if you see any kind of a separation, especially in consideration of like, um, the quotes by Christ that Sabbath is for man, not man for the Sabbath. Yet it says, keep holy the Sabbath, which, if you look at holy, set apart, as in not a common thing, and something to be revered, something to be kept in memory. So, do you have anything that you think you could make a persuasive argument for me that there has been some Sabbath to this earth?
I would say just the historical record, what the people wrote about, and then what's in the Bible, and depending on if you're going to take it historically or not, like what the Jews experienced when they left Egypt. I mean, you have Exodus 16 there. I'm not sure if you take that as historical or not, but they, if the narrative is historical, it's certainly true that God puts a lot of weight on it. So the guy gets killed because he disobeyed the Sabbath command. It's like the first, it might be like the only death for breaking the commandments in there. And they hadn't even received the judgments yet. And so they're like, Moses, what do we do with this guy? And Moses is like, I'm not sure. And he asked God, and God's like, you got to kill him. Now, people understand that in different ways, but it seems they want to indicate that it was important to God for some reason. Mm-hmm. And so I would appeal to like, he appeals back to creation when he gives the commandment at Sinai. And of course, if that was a literal, they really had a thing they carried around and it had tablets in it or whatever, it indicates that God actually handed them to Moses. How does that work if God's a spirit, right? It describes it in detail in Exodus 24. And then I would say
God's obviously a spirit, but that doesn't mean that the angels are restricted to no physicality.
Yeah, I would take it as being a pre-incarnate Christ that would have been the one handling it because of what other texts.
That's one way to handle that. That's acceptable. Okay.
But regarding like the Sabbath as being a literal thing, I would just say no one really disputes that historically, Jewish or Christian or historically. Like we know people were, and they said it was because it was the law of God, and then there's the narrative of the Bible. And then I would say in the New Testament, when Jesus says it's not, when he says it's, the context there about when he says it was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, the context there is they're claiming he's breaking the Sabbath for doing particular things. And then he's describing why it's not by using things that happened in the Old Testament. And then he's complaining like he does many times elsewhere with them where they make up these other rules that, and he says like, why don't we do your stupid rules? Well, why do you make up rules that make what God said to do of no effect, right? And then he describes them not taking care of their parents, and then by like being pious frauds. And because if you had money and you put it in the temple and it was to God, then you wouldn't have to, the inheritance doesn't have to go to the family to take care of them. And so they were clearly exploiting that rule to not honor their parents, and so Jesus says that. And so it's what he's saying is, I think he's saying, look, this was intended to be a blessing, a rest day, a day of fellowship. And you guys are making it like this. And you still see that in Israel today, right? You can't press buttons. You can't start a fire. And like, they're just being really pedantic about it. And Jesus is like interpreting the law because that's what he's doing as a rabbi. So I think he's saying, look, I made this as a blessing and you're making it into a curse. Because then he also says in the parallel passage, the Son of Man is therefore Lord of the Sabbath. So people often read that as saying, he's like, look, you guys are making a big deal out of the Sabbath, but I made it so you could just trample all over it. And then he's saying, I'm Lord of the Sabbath, so I can do that. I can say you can trample it, and you guys are trying to uphold it. No, he's not. That's kind of an exaggerated way people read it. I'm saying they don't say it that way, but
yeah, that's an exaggeration. Yeah.
But that's kind of the notion.
Even if they're not verbalizing it in an exaggerated way, they still hold an exaggerated view.
Yeah, I think it's missing the point. I'm just trying to kind of drive the point home. People don't say that, but it's like they're not keeping the Sabbath, and then they'll use that verse to me to say we shouldn't do it or we don't have to. And it's like the thing is, have to is the wrong way of looking at it. It's like, part of it's, I would say, honoring God as the creator, because that's the only commandment that you can do that has his name in it, and it declares him as the creator because he rested and when he created the world. And of course that's difficult for like old earth, I suppose, but I'm obviously a young earth creationist. But I think he's saying, look, you're making it into a burden. It's supposed to be a blessing. That's the point of it. And then he's saying, I think when he says I'm Lord of the Sabbath, I read that to him. I would say that is a point where they probably tore their robes, because how could a man be Lord of the Sabbath? That's like you were saying, the Lord's day, right? It was God's day. How can he be Lord? How can this Jesus guy say he's Lord of the Sabbath day? So that's a significant text to me about Jesus.
Okay, and breathe. Welcome, James Apperson, peace and respect. And of course, Midnight Sparkle, also Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare. Welcome you both. I'm going to go have a cigarette. Feel free to ambush one of my best friends, Jamie Russell. You guys
Hey,
ready to do that?
Hey, long time no see, guys.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I think Rebecca's. Yeah, all right, man.
Yeah.
We'll be here for you, Richard.
We'll hold the fort.
Yeah. Who else we got in here?
We have Odin, my man, Odin, the
Awesome.
Batman,
Very good.
or just Batman, I guess.
In hell,
Hey,
there is
guys.
no Wi-Fi password, or it's somebody said that it was funny. They're like, "Oh, it's pi," so it goes. The password goes on forever, so you can never get Wi-Fi.
Well, pi can also be shown to 3.14, so
The pi
Or
word.
3.14 ... dot forever. Good luck. Anyway, Jesus Wi-Fi pass, grace.
So I've been kind of listening in on the conversation, in and out, for various reasons, and there's a few interesting things that I would like to kind of tackle. The first thing
Are
is,
you a believer or an atheist?
no, I'm a believer.
Oh, okay. Good to know.
wow, you didn't even let Odin finish what you already asked. Are you a believer? Or just like that's a
I just
man.
want to make sure I'm hearing where you're coming from, because I didn't know what your position was. I know these two atheists got scoundrels are non-believers. So
Well,
Wait, what?
right?
Wait,
What
you
are-
call us scam girls? I'm confused.
You call them
I'm just
scoundrels?
scoundrels. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it.
Scoundrels. Okay,
Damn,
well,
way to set the tone of the conversation.
we're off to a good start, Jamie.
Jesus.
Good
Dude,
start.
you guys, I get along with atheists better than I do with Christians, because they're always calling me a heretic, cultist, whatever. I like atheists more than usually. I mean, generally speaking. So I'm just
Probably.
Yeah,
I
that makes
I think more Christians deconvert other Christians than atheists or any
Right.
other religion. But that's besides the point. So I want to talk about the Sabbath, which is interesting. So Jesus heals on the Sabbath, right? And I have one question. Do you think that is more so a show of lordship, or is that a teaching lesson to all the potential followers of Christ? Now, teaching lesson meaning where if it's the Sabbath, right, and you see a man drowning, right, let's say, or something, some dirt fell on him or something like that, and he could potentially die or whatever. It requires you to put in work in order to save his life, right? Do you go to save his life, or you like, well, it's the Sabbath, so sorry, bro, I can't save your life.
right.
So, so it's basically which where you think was happening within those scenes.
I think it's both, but in a particular way. So like I was saying, I think when people want to make it about lordship, they're kind of coming at it from this context of wanting to describe what Jesus is doing in such a way that he's kind of saying the Sabbath doesn't matter. I don't think that's what he's doing, because he never actually says anything like that. He just explains how they're seeing it wrong. In other words, so I think he is giving hints that like he has the authority to declare what what it means to keep the Sabbath, right? And they're not getting it, and he's chastising them. They're ruining it, basically, is what he's saying. And so he is asserting his lordship, which is very significant, but not to do away with it, rather, but to show that they're missing the point. And so, like, yes, healing is absolutely okay on the Sabbath. That's what its purpose is. It's not like it's supposed to be this burdensome thing where you can't do this and you can't do that. It's more of like this. The ultimate way of keeping the Sabbath is not trampling on it by ignoring it. By it says, how long will you if you turn your foot from the Old Testament, but from you turn your foot from trampling the Sabbath and call it a delight, a holy day of the Lord, then you will rise, on the mountains. And he's saying, I made you to like have this fellowship with me, you're designed in such a way where you need rest. And I think everybody can agree with that. You can't work someone to death. They will die early. And then he's also saying, look, these things are lawful. You can eat on the Sabbath. You can pick grain while you're walking, in fellowship with people. That's not a problem. You can heal people because you can do good on the Sabbath. It was never wrong. Oh, I can't work on the Sabbath, so I'm going to go leave the guy in the ditch. It's like, that would be outrageous. So it's both, but yeah.
So I do have a follow-up question. I don't know if James or Midnight
I'll try to keep
wanted
it
to
shorter,
ask
guys.
you
I'm
anything.
sorry.
Hang on a sec. Brojo, there we go. I kind of have mods here, so I gotta check who comes in or not until yeah, Richard gets back. But no, I feel if the person wants to go.
I think James was going to say something.
Oh no, go ahead.
Okay, so my follow-up question, and I guess I'll give some context to that, right? So
You don't want my opinion?
No,
I
Brojo, we don't
mean,
want your
no.
opinion. No, go ahead. I'm
Well,
sorry.
like I put in the comment section, this is like straining the gnat and swallowing the camel. I think Jesus was giving a lesson. Listen, you religious folks, you're so legalistic, and you're so concentrating on following the laws and being right that you miss the bigger picture. Like if somebody is in need, that's the greater good, is to help somebody who's in need, despite what you think you're breaking some law about not working.
Do
So
I hear
I
a New
think
York accent there? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah. I think
that's
right.
it. It's New York, yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay. So that's what I
So,
think Jesus is trying to say.
I agree.
so you, Brojo, you think the more of the emphasis is on teaching versus showing lordship, basically. That's what you think. It's more of that.
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, so given the circumstances where, like for example, when they picked some grain, right? Because my understanding, at least intuitively, right, is that the purposes of the Sabbath laws existing, right, is not necessarily just to emulate who you're supposed to aspire to, right, which is supposed to be God, right? But it's also for the purposes of letting the land rest and stuff like that, right? But if you are starving and the Sabbath and you're in, you know, um, a field,
Or at a
right,
pig
with
farm.
food, right, you're going to have to pick it, which means you're going to have to put in work, right? But you're
Right.
putting in the work for yourself. You're not helping anyone, right? So I think specifically the Sabbath most likely has to do with
Well,
putting
imagine
in
God looking
work
at you.
to,
Can you imagine
huh?
God looking at you from above? This fool has got all this food surrounded by. He's hungry, but he's not going to eat it because he thinks I'm going to be mad at him
He doesn't want to
for not eating the
harvest
food. You know what I'm
crops.
saying?
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're not supposed to
but I
harvest crops on the Sabbath, but you can pick food off the corners of anybody's field. They're supposed to allow to let the crops stay on the outskirts of their lot or their
I mean
thing.
sure, but I think it's deeper than that, right? I think it's the intentionality that matters,
Yeah,
right? If you are picking the grain with the intentions of selling them or trading them, right? That's when you're breaking the law. If you're starving, right? You're obviously not going to break the law because if you choose to not eat and you die as a result, you commit suicide, and so therefore you've broken another law
Right.
anyways,
I was just
right?
thinking what Sarah was saying over there on the side. It's about the letter
Wh-
of the law instead of the spirit of the law. And
yeah.
that's what.
Yeah. So, and I think that's part of the reason um, when Jesus said that he is the law of Moses, or he fulfills it, right? Because I think it's important in that him taking that upon himself and using himself as an example in terms of the behavior when he does things and when he doesn't do certain things, right? I think ultimately It's more so a teaching thing. I would say 75% teaching versus establishing lordship, because I don't think he's necessarily worried about establishing lordship, considering the amount of miracles he had done by that time, and many people already accepting him.
Yeah, that's an
If
interesting
I'm
point.
Lord, I don't have to prove it to anybody.
Well, there's parts where he like he did like he's not telling them directly, and then there's that part where he's before the Sanhedrin, and they're like they say they finally just say, look, we're calling God as our witness, right? Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? And he's like, they have trouble translating the exactly into the English, but he's like, basically because they called God as their witness, he's like, yes, he just tells them flatly, finally. But elsewhere, he's just kind of like living it out because he came to show us how to be human, I would argue. So like, yeah, like what you were describing is right on the point. He is a rabbi after all, right? He has disciples. What do rabbis do? They interpret the law of Moses. That's what they do. So they're teaching what the law of Moses means by being a teacher.
Yeah, but there's a reason why he picked the people who he picked, right? He picked a bunch of fishermen. He picked a zealot. He picked a tax collector. He picked what's essentially a businessman. I think Judas was a businessman, right? Like he picked normal people from different walks of life to be his followers for a specific reason, right? And I think the reason behind that is to kind of demonstrate that whatever he has to offer, obviously, right, your career, your past circumstances and stuff like that doesn't really matter, right? But it's also to kind of show that, like, in terms of just being graceful, right? Regardless of the person, you should be graceful to them regardless, right? And so
Yeah.
if you see someone essentially, right, let's say the tax collector for whatever reason, he is collecting taxes on the Sabbath, right? As far as you're concerned, he's breaking the law, right? But in his circumstance, for all you know, he doesn't have a choice, right? Doesn't have a choice in the sense that he would be killed if he doesn't do what he's tasked with by his overlord. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a sense where, yeah, like I think people are judged according to their circumstances, right? So, but if you mean like, I mean, I don't know how many Jewish tax collectors would have been collecting taxes on the Sabbath, but if you mean, but right, if you're looking at it from the point of view of the tax collector being, they're just totally far from God because they're just self-absorbed in their exploiting people because that's what tax collectors, that's how they got their profit. That's how they made their own money. I think is that they would just get the tax money and whatever more they could get out of the person and however they did, and that was their pay. And so they would often be rich because they would have clever ways of getting more
I
money.
mean, not necessarily, right? It's a
Not
job.
necessarily.
Like everyone, like the zealot, right? The zealot, being a zealot is a job. So he's saying that independent of lifestyle and job, right? These people, these individuals, are still worthy. Ergo, regardless of whoever you meet and interact with, if you are in Christ, right, their careers and lifestyle shouldn't matter to you if, let's say, you decide to minister to them, for example, right, or you're gonna heal them or treat them or feed them, right? None of those things should matter.
Oh, absolutely, and that's the example Jesus gives us. I mean, he did hang out with the sinners. He wanted to. I mean, there's like several things you could say about that, but he was obviously compassionate, and I would say like if people are arguing about doctrine and getting stinky too much, I always tell them maybe just go wash gay feet for a couple days or something and don't worry about doctrine because that's what Jesus did. He washed people's feet. He died on a cross, God naked on a cross. If you believe Jesus is God, but that's how I see it. It's like think about that. Think about what God's saying there in that statement. He's naked on a cross, dying and
How
showing
many
people.
strangers' feet have you washed?
Me? Not very many.
10?
No, probably not. Probably not even 10. Probably like 4. But I'm not
I,
saying if you're responding to my statement about washing gay feet, it's a concept. It's not. I'm not saying literally you must go or you're not right with God or something. I'm just saying like go serve some people. That's the idea.
Sure. Now
so
I've
would you
got a
say?
different. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Jay.
Everything that you guys say, I get it. Like I get the value of it. I get the logic behind it. But I got a completely different take on every single thing you guys are saying. And I don't feel like I need to like backtrack and like list all my disagreements. But I think he probably picked his apostles based on who he thought was hot. That's just my theory. You guys
What do
can
you
do
mean
whatever
by
you
hot?
want with that, but
They have the right stuff. You mean?
yeah, they have the right
They
stuff.
had the right stuff. I mean, if you think about it, though, right, it is strategic in nature. You could argue, right? So Peter, is from what I can remember, has more of the leadership qualities, right? More boisterous or whatever, more outspoken, despite him rejecting Christ at the end of the day. But um, um,
That's one of the
Matthew, the
reasons I
tax
believe the
collector,
text.
he likes to take notes and writes everything down, right? Um, the Brothers of Thunder, what do you call them again? Uh,
James and John.
James and John, yeah. Like those two guys, they have specific talents that were useful. So like he didn't necessarily just pick them all willy-nilly. They all had things that were useful to him, right? To the group as a whole, right? A matter of fact, you can even probably make an argument that Saul, one of the reasons he picked Saul was because of Saul's ability to, he's well traveled, he speaks multiple languages, right? He knows the Torah like the back, the back of his hand, Tanakh like the back of his hand, right? So if you were to send out anyone, right, the to be able to spread the gospel, right, and who can be challenged by, intellectuals who might disagree, right? Paul is the guy that you'd want to kind of have go up there on the debate stage, so to speak, to kind of justify everything.
Yeah, he knows the word of God, and
Quick
also the
moment
fact that-
of
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Richard.
quick moment of channel. Uh, Side chat, if you would be so kind, please tickle the algorithm. Appreciate that. Sorry, go ahead.
If you do not like this video, you have sinned against
If
Richard.
you do not like this video, you would not be here. If you are here, please like the video.
Yeah, there's way
Because
more
attention
thumbs.
span of people is about 3 seconds.
So I do get behind the idea that each of them were picked for a specific purpose. Now the controversial one is him picking Judas, right?
Why is it
Knowing,
controversial?
well, it's controversial because a lot of people, well, a lot of Christians tend to think that he picked Judas solely for the purposes of knowing that Judas is going to betray him, right?
Why do you make him the
Um,
banker?
but exactly, that is exactly what I was going to say, right? Like he didn't pick him solely because hey, he's going to betray me or whatever, right? He picked him to be the banker because he knows money. He is a businessman.
It's more than that, I think.
And I mean,
in a time where money is very, very difficult and it's hard to make more of it, it's a huge sign of trust to make someone your banker.
very true.
So it's more than he's just good with numbers. It's more than that. It's a trust thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it leads me to make assertions like they were in cahoots.
I mean, I think that's a fair argument. I mean, you kind of have to be if you're going to trust them with the money, which is supposed to
That's
be
what I'm
funding the
saying.
ministry and all that stuff, right?
I mean,
Um,
you put say Peter in charge, and he's liable to draw a sword and prevent the whole thing from happening.
yeah.
Jesus, all right.
And Jamie's connection sometimes does that, and he'll be back as soon as he can get back.
Sorry, I was going to say I love that about Peter, right? Because Peter's so zealous, and so he's like, "Well, you can't die." And when they go to arrest him, he cuts the guy's ear off, like you're
Yeah,
saying.
right.
But then Jesus, so when Jesus is there with him, he's all sorts of gung ho and ready to fight and draw his sword, right? And then Jesus is like, "Dude, you're gonna like." I'm gonna. It says when he was ready to go and depart this world and return to his father, and then he implicates Judas and sends him off to do his deed. And then he says to Peter, he's like, "Look," Peter's all like, "I want to go where you're going," because he's talking about leaving or whatever. And he's like, "What do you mean? We're gonna go with you." And he's like, "You can't come where I'm going." But he's like, "But by the way, you're gonna you're gonna deny
You're
me
going to
three
deny
times."
me.
And so he does. Like,
So just a little play on word, Peter the cross blocker. Glad you liked it.
Yeah.
don't say that 3 times fast.
Right on.
I might mess it up.
So I think probably the church should mainly probably be a sanctuary for contemplation versus solely worshiping. And I say contemplation um, mainly because, for one, all of our circumstances are different and people are going to do things based on their circumstance, right? But if you're going to church and you're worshiping and you're praying, right? Um, the praying is a part of the worship, right? How much actual reflection are you doing? Like, and I think that's probably the the part of the church that is either missing. I don't know if it was a thing. I think probably monks were more prone to probably engage in contemplation.
I don't think
Um,
that was the original intention of the church in the scripture, though. I'm not saying they're bad or something, but I'm saying like I don't know that was the idea.
I'll say it.
You think it was?
I'll say that churches today are bad. Yeah.
Oh, sure,
On
sure.
on the whole, yeah.
yeah, so I mean, so if you're saved, right, and I'm not going to go into whether or not people can lose their salvation or anything like that, but if it's a situation where you're saved, you're not you're not conscious of your behavior, but you're concerned, or your goal is to live in Christ, but you're living in a way, right, that where, as far as the people around you are concerned, is not Christ-like, right? But you refuse to heed any warnings or whatever, and so you kind of go to church, you throw up a few Hail Marys, or you ask for forgiveness, right? And then you kind of like go back to what you were doing, right? So where does the contemplation come in? Because it seems during the process, at least from my experience, anyways, there's not a lot of contemplation that takes place. And contemplation doesn't necessarily mean just kind of sitting around and meditating or anything like that. I mean having conversations about circumstances that you think might be that you think where your reaction is contradictory to how you're supposed to be, um, if you're someone in Christ, right?
Let's play that out. Let's see what James and Brojo have to say about our fan fiction.
Okay.
All right, you go first, Joe. I mean, I can go first if you want.
I'm sorry, I was reading up on Judas Iscariot. Sorry, so I got distracted.
Yeah, it's really interesting if you look up the words Judas Iscariot. It suggests that he definitely was in cahoots.
What were you asking?
We're asking the peanut section to voice their opinions about the fan fiction guys.
You talking about everything we just got done saying?
Anything that stood out to you whatsoever.
I mean,
if what I'm to do is to have a truth and expose it, then what that needs to stand up to is the challenges to my positive assertion. And I think that everybody here who's Christian would feel that way.
Well, I mean, they weren't expressing your ideas; they were expressing their own.
Yes, but they'd still feel that way.
I mean, you believe in alien Jesus, and I didn't hear them mentioning that at all.
Jesus is an alien. Thank you.
Yeah, but meant differently, right? Like alien,
maybe
different. It's not the same.
It's the same.
He's from Mexico.
right, sure. So, I mean, I get all kinds of thoughts about it. When I hear Judas, when in the context of the Christian story, I hear an essential character, and I'm a little bit surprised that he's denounced as the guy that betrayed Jesus in the stories, when he's the only guy that did what Jesus wanted him to do. Everybody else is like keeping their safe distance. They don't want to get in no trouble. Judas is, saying, you know what? Jesus came here to die. He wants to die. He specifically told me, get it done more quickly. I'm on a job. I'm going to take care of it, right? Yep. And to turn around and say that he's the bad guy for doing something that if he hadn't done it, there wouldn't be any Christianity in the story, right? Because then what's Jesus going to do? Hand himself in? Like, it just seems like there should be a Saint Judas Day in Christianity. Biggest holiday of the year. And I just
he listens to Jesus too. He's like, go do the thing you're going to do. And he goes.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that I used to do, like way back when in Hangouts, is that I would join some Christian rooms and drop the bomb and be like, hey, Judas was a disciple of God. He healed and did miracles, and he is saved. Fight me. And the room would typically erupt.
Debate me, bro. I want to tell Rick, I think Judas was a zealot. I think he absolutely believed Jesus was the Messiah, and he wanted him to take the throne from Rome. And so he was trying to force him to take the throne from Rome by causing those kind of issues where Jesus would be forced to hurry up and take the kingdom for the Jews back. So that's what he was trying to do. I think he thought absolutely believed he was the Messiah, and he was trying to get him on the throne of Rome. And Jesus wasn't having it, and he didn't listen to Jesus, and so it got him killed.
The irony of it is that the actual zealot, right, understood the message that he wasn't there to bring war, right? He was there to save and to serve. I do find that to be pretty interesting. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
That was the problem. What he wanted wasn't what Jesus came to do, and then he wouldn't listen to him. And so in that sense, he believed he was the Messiah, but he didn't listen to him.
It's kind of funny to me. We even have online programs that are biblical programs like eSword and My Sword. So somewhere in the Christian consciousness as a society, they understand that sword means the truth of God. But then whenever they change the meaning that's obviously in the text to mean something you chop people's heads off with.
Right.
I just find that's cherry picking. That's logically fallacious. It's one or the other, but it can't be both.
Do you think so? I would say context determines. Context determines.
Well, as soon as I say context, I'm saying my reading frame. Now I'm talking about my own biases and me as a flawed human being. But I'd rather that the text was consistent than I choose, the overall message and when I choose what context is which.
This is where I want to throw you a bone in the sense where I think, words have overlap when they're used in different contexts. And so to notice that and to draw out some deeper meaning that has validity in a lot of cases, I think it does. So, but I just think if you're dogmatically going to say it has to mean the exact same thing, that's problematic. I don't think that's right. But I think it's really interesting to explore the sort of overlap in the way the words overlap, but have
Sure.
different contexts. And you do a good job of that.
If you had a choice, would you have Yahweh violent or non-violent?
Depends on what you mean by violent. Like, I would prefer he judges at times
Bro,
when to
really?
not judge would cause more problems.
No, look, hold on. Okay, if are you saying something like it depends on the situation or what I consider to be violence, or say that again?
I'm just saying, like, yeah, there's some passages that are hard to like understand. Like, it seems like there could have been a more way, or it seems like Jesus would have done it a different way, or something like that, or like God would want us to do it a different way normally. And so it's like, what's going on there? And you try to come up with reasons to explain it away or whatever, and that's problematic. And I'm with you there. I would just say that I can think of times where it makes sense to have to use violence if there's, you just hypothetically, right? Like, if there's a bunch of people doing heinous, awful things to other human beings and they won't stop, you ask them to stop and you warn them that you're going to deal with them if they don't stop, there comes a point where violence is the answer for the sake of the innocent.
Okay.
And
What if there is a logically plausible other option that would do the same thing?
Then we should consider that option, obviously, right?
Well,
And if
it's obvious to
doesn't
me
allow
that
it, we have to wrestle with it, right? I don't have answers.
I mean,
for all
if the text is going to make a claim like, quoting God, I know of my intent for you to prosper you, etc., you know the lines I'm talking about, then that would mean that in order to be consistent, unchanging, always doing what is best for the people. So that means whatever is logically possible and would be better for the people has to be done.
Yeah, and then the question, your original question, comes to bear on that, right? Is it ever the case that the best
Violence
thing
was
for
the best answer? Yeah,
right?
I don't think
Sounds
so.
wrong. Yeah, it sounds wrong.
I mean, so I think that's a good question. And when I was, you wanted to say something, James?
oh no, I mean yes and no. Go ahead, finish, and then I'll say it.
Okay. So I don't know if you guys are knowing the conversation, but one of the things that my questions were leading up to was the purpose of the parables. Why did Jesus teach using so many parables?
Well, I want
But
to answer first on that one. I'm going to be selfish since it's my channel.
Okay.
Because he's talking to his son, the next Christ. It's for him to understand. So it's like he's breaking the fourth wall in acting, plays, movies, etc. It's like he has turned away from the apostles and gone, I'm doing this to his target. He's saying it to his target audience. And that's why he's saying, I'm saying it so that they don't understand. It's because they're not the actual audience.
So it's like a mystery cult. There's supposed to be like this secret doctrines that only the inner circle can know about, and everybody else. Go ahead.
The text says that he spoke in parables so that, because if they would hear and listen and learn, then they would have understood. And he didn't. He's saying it. He didn't want them to. That's why he says he spoke in parables.
Right.
And so Richard, what you said is right. I just think what you then interpret that, I would say, yeah, it's meant. He was trying to make sure the leadership, which were under judicial, hardening and judgment, which God says he uses that to make sure they end up killing him, basically. But but you can get from the Old Testament that this was warned that this would happen from Deuteronomy 30 on. He's like, these people are going to be disobedient, but there's a remnant that didn't harden their hearts. You see this in John 5 and John 6. No one can come to me unless the Father draws them, and he describes what's in Isaiah, and he's saying, all the people heard, but some of them listened. It's like he tells them they don't have the love of the Father in them. That's why they don't know who he is. And so I think and then he says plainly, right? I speak in parables because I don't want to make sure they don't get it, because he's leading up to going to the cross and they're going to kill him. but it's not God like grooming them to kill him in the full sense, but because he knows the hardness of their hearts, and he's operating in that to bring that purpose about, because it says that's what he did, right? He brings salvation to the Gentiles through the hardness of the hearts. That's what Paul talks about in Romans. Sorry, I'll stop there.
This is why I hate religiosity, right? Because to me, right, this answer is very, very simple. Because I just listened to Mr. Jamie a while ago, right? And what he's saying makes sense within specific contexts, right? But Jesus gave parables under multiple different circumstances, covering multiple different topics, right? And the purpose of the parables is to trigger contemplation. That is the
You're right.
purpose
There's
of the
more than one
parables,
context. You're right. You're right. That's true.
right? And this goes back to just to throw things back around again, right? The church, one of the most important things that the church does not engage in, right, is contemplation. Sitting at church, preaching, getting preached to, even talking about politics in church, right? All of that gets done, except for the contemplation part, right? Because if you think about it, right, when you read a parable in the Bible, like when when you're just kind of sitting and you're reading for yourself, and for the first time, you come across a parable, you don't just take it as you know word for word. You intuitively understand the purpose of the parable is to put your mind in a state to where you need to think about what it means, right? It's kind of like your teacher, and he was a rabbi, right? It's like your teacher in class just teaches you, um, you know, a formula in algebra, and then throws at you, a problem you need to solve, right? The reason why I do that is to engage your mind into contemplating how to use the information they just gave you, and use it in a way that is useful and productive.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that and kind of don't. Because
I'm listening.
Because for why?
in a parable, you're not really giving somebody information. You're giving them phrases that they can assign any meaning to that they want. That's not information. That's just drawing up what's already in their brain. And if if the audience doesn't have the necessary information to begin with, any parable you give them is going to be misunderstood automatically. They can sit for a minute, they can sit for an hour, they can become a monk and sit for almost all day, every day for years. They're going to come to the wrong conclusions if you don't specifically spell out what you meant by the parables.
I mean, you don't necessarily need, so typically, right, because there's a pattern that you'll notice whenever Jesus speaks, right? He will engage in a conversation, right? And he'll talk about a specific topic, right? And he'll lay a foundation, and then he will offer the parable, right? He drops the parable, right? But not all the time he explains it. He drops it and then he kind of jumps over it, right? And talk about the implications of what the parable is supposed to explain. So yes, if you just give a person, a random parable, right, and no context, then you're absolutely right. They won't know anything. It's not information, right? It's really nothing. You're not saying anything. But if you set up a foundation, then you give the parable, then yes, right? The contemplation is justified and it's useful, right?
Well,
Okay,
think
pause.
about Sorry.
Pause, everybody. I want to thank you all, and you couldn't be someone you're not, but you guys are just doing a smashing job of interacting with some amount of grace and respect, and thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
Richards, pay me.
I was just going to say about that. When Jesus is often kind of going off what I was saying about the judicial hardening thing and bringing the message to the nations, which is kind of how it ends, right? The Great Commission. But just like think about, people still argue about what Luke 16 is talking about in the latter half about, it's literal. They're in Hades. That means Jesus, but his point is not really teaching about, he does teach about judgment and the fate of people after they die in Luke 16, right? The rich man and Lazarus. But what does he say? We see it get re-said in just regular narrative when he says, the guy in Hades is like, let me go warn my brothers. And he's like, no, they're not. He's like, they have Moses. If Moses is enough of a witness, they're not going to believe you. If they don't believe Moses, they're not going to believe you. And he says later, he's like, look, in these texts, you think you have eternal life, but they're they which testify of me. So he's talking about the Jews that aren't going to receive him, really, is what he's talking about, and how they think they're good, right? Because they're rich. They have the word of God. They have they're sons of Abraham. And Jesus is like, to some of them, right? Because of their actions and whatnot. He's like, you're not, he's like, you're a slave. And they're like, we're not slaves. We're sons of Abraham. And he's like, dude, whoever your master is, you're a slave to them. But if the son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. So he's like trying to get them to come to him, but they're not. And he's telling them, look, you're not good just because you're a son of Abraham. You're sons of the devil. You're father of the devil. And that's what ends up happening. Many of them reject him, not all of them, but it's kind of mystical in a way, right? Because then it's almost like he knew we were going to read it and see that he was predicting what would happen.
Yeah, I mean, sure, but again, right? It's almost like again, kind of going back to the classroom, right? You learned the formula. You were shown the formula, right? And you're given a problem to solve, right? For whatever reason, you just kind of want to do it your way that you have in your mind instead of doing it the way or ways that the teacher showed you, right? And you kind of deciding to kind of doing it your way over and over again, right? The teacher is now going to be a little bit more forceful in terms of trying to get you to understand what they're trying to say and do for you, right? And yes, is there hardening taking place? Yes, you can make that argument, but I would argue that he already knew they were hardened already. So he's trying to force contemplation, right? And it's not like it's not like it's a situation where these men were idiots, right? They were just stubborn.
Right. He's like plainly stating the state that they're in and what they need to do, but without saying it like directly, right?
Yeah.
Think about what he says to them too in other places when he's giving a parable. He says, you guys look, because Jesus is the prophet that Moses said he would come and to listen to him, right? And so he is that prophet, and he's hinting at that throughout his ministry. And it's in the text. And then he's like, look, you guys don't get it. I said this earlier with Richard. I was like, he's like, look, you always killed the sent ones. The prophets people always didn't want to hear the true message from the true prophets, right? They didn't want to hear it, and they killed them, right, in all sorts of crazy ways. And he's like, you guys always murder the ones giving you the truth. And he says, you murder them from righteous Abel to Zechariah, A to Z.
At least they were consistent.
Yeah.
Damn, bro.
They did themselves into the nations. America.
Dude, that was brutal. Oh my goodness. But it's funny because, like, look, it's the I think it's Luke 17, the master and the servants parable,
That's
where
what I was just
he
quoting.
kept sending out his servants and he kept murdering them. Then he decided to send the son, and they did. So
Finally, the master's son goes and they kill him and burn it down or whatever.
yeah. So it's like, again, right? Like he is intently, like, he basically told him his whole purpose there in that one parable, right? And so the obviously you're not supposed to get it right away. It's supposed to trigger contemplation, because now that the events have taken place or are taking place, now you understand. If you understand quicker, that's fine, right? You get the big picture. That's cool, right? But for everyone else, right, it's there for contemplation at the end of the day,
But
right?
do you
And
think
I
God knew? Do you believe that God knew which ones would come? Like he knew some of them wouldn't come or weren't going to come to him, and some of them would, right? So he's like proving people, right? He's like, in a way, it's like separating people. It's like the ones that will come will, and then the ones that aren't going to are going to go the other direction, and that he's just
I mean, I
happened.
mean, whether or not he knew or he didn't, to me doesn't really matter, because his goal is to save everyone, right? Even the vipers, as he calls them, right? Sons of the devil, right? Is he telling them what they are in terms of their behavior? Absolutely. I mean, even when
How could you be
he
any more loving than that?
exactly.
I mean, I get what you guys are saying. I really, really do. But it seems to me that if an all-knowing, all-wise, all-powerful being wants a thing, then he will get the thing that he wants. Nothing can stand in the way. And so, if he wants everybody to end up with a certain kind of perception and relationship with him, then there's just no way that anything else can result in the end.
I mean, I
I think
think
that's
I think that depends on your position. If you're maybe if you're like a determinist, a Calvinist or something like that, that would make sense in some weird way, but it'll have a lot of contradictions. But even if you were to grant all of that, right? Not that I don't necessarily hold that position, the omni positions when it comes to God, at least not in the classical way.
Hmm.
But even if I were to grant that, right, the the purpose, you run into the issue of free will and him allowing everyone, despite knowing the outcome, right, to make their decisions freely without coercion,
Yeah, but
right?
people don't, right? They don't know everything they need to know in order to make the decision that he wants them to make.
I mean, sure, but in terms of the decisions being made has to do with, I would argue, lifestyle and behavior, right? So if the man is coming to you and telling you, hey, he's not telling you anything that you didn't know. He's essentially reinforcing what you already know, and he's bringing you back to where it was. We're just talking in the context of the Pharisees, right?
Sure,
Like
they
they
know
already
they're in
knew
his same
all of those
religion, so they
things.
they know what he knows.
Yeah,
They're in the same religion, sure.
they
yeah. So
listened, but
he
they didn't learn. It says they didn't. So yeah, it's like they're not. That's what I mean by proving. It's like it seems like God's operating in a, you have to say God's operating in such a way like right. He never like puts judgment without warning people first. It seems like he doesn't do anything without telling his servants first. He the wickedness has to fill up before he brings judgment on them through violence or whatever. There's all sorts of texts that suggest he judges them according to the light that they have. The idea of heaping hot coals on someone's head comes to mind. These kinds of ideas are all over the Bible and in the sense of like how this is operating, I think. But sorry.
Well, I mean, it seemed like two different discussions to me. To talk about what people in Jesus' same religion knew, and then therefore what standards we should be able to expect of them, versus the larger experience of humanity and what people do and don't know, and what people can and can't understand. It seems like a whole other discussion to have.
I
Sure.
mean, sure, but one of the so when Jesus was engaging, um, um, I don't remember the exact scene, but he
There's one in
spoke
John 9.
about
John 9, probably.
he spoke about when God sent one of the prophets during a famine. God sent one of the prophets to a Gentile woman, right? He could have sent him to any Israelite, but he sent him far away to a Gentile woman's place, right? Who was starving, and you know, the prophet went. He asked the woman for food until God would bless her, and she had faith in whatever he had to say, right? And she fed him despite having no food, right? And her faith gave her unlimited food, right? As a result. Now, what does that say, right? The religious circumstance that you are in, right? Context being the Pharisees, right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I'm still here to save you. Whatever I'm offering to you, right? It's not just for the Jews, it is for everyone. And he gave a bunch more examples. For example, when one of the prophets went to go help a soldier, an enemy soldier, who was a Gentile. So it does. I get what you're saying, James, but it does connect in terms of the whole of the world. Like, yes, you can have uh, you know, have the Jews being the chosen people, but they were just the base, right? The intent is to make that salvation and the I guess the gift of eternal life, or whatever you think, the ultimate gift is, right? Available to everyone. And that's been shown even throughout the Old Testament. Not in big increments, of course, right? But small circumstances.
Yeah, like when Naaman gets healed from his leprosy or something like that.
Yep.
And then he gets and he's like, he wants to, like, he loves Israel, and then he asks whoever the prophet is, who is it? Let's see, Elisha, and he asks Elisha if he can, like, take some of the dirt from Israel back to his land, which kind of seems like a weird idol sort of thing, right? And he's like, yeah, go ahead, it's fine. He's like, he didn't be like, no, you have to come and do the Feast of Tabernacles, or you're going to go to hell or whatever. He's like, yeah, just, you love the God of Israel, like, go ahead, take some dirt with you and, put it on your shelf or whatever. That's
because guess what? That man, he's not he's not under any Israeli law, right? He wasn't bound by the law, so he didn't need to do any of those things. So whatever, it is for the whole world.
I mean, it just seems like he was just showing respect for their customs or whatever.
Sure. Don't want to read into
Bathroom break. I'll be back.
Right. But, we can point to any individual in the story and make an argument for how they probably knew this and knew that, and maybe that created some special obligation for them, opportunity for them. But there's countless people in the world before then, during then, after then, since then, right here, right now, and tomorrow, that aren't going to be given whatever information they need. They're not going to necessarily, some of them, have the intellectual capacity to process it, or the emotional well-being to process it, etc. And they're going to live and they're going to die wrong about whatever the message is supposed to be and what it means to them. And then what happens to those people?
Won't the judge of the earth do right? Judge them according to the light that they have. That's how I think of it. But
sure. I like the idea of judging people based on the kind of people they were, rather than what they did and didn't know, because if they didn't know, then they can't be obligated to it. But if that's the case, why have Bibles at all? Like, why have the message? Just send around a flyer telling everybody, don't be a dick. Maybe write that in the sky once every month or something.
Well, I think don't you think that's a little bit naive, though? Like, let me ask you this. So often when I'm looking at, this came up on my channel where we were talking about during the Civil War when my church started, and some of the things that people were saying and what other people were saying, right? There's abolitionists and non-abolitionists, right? And someone was accusing people in my church of being racist because they were saying something like, look, slavery just ended. There's massive turmoil between whites and blacks in some areas. And so in order to get the message before them, we're going to just like, we're not going to push really hard, like integration, like, you know, like be indignant about it. We're just going to like, it's not going to last forever. We're not going to be for it, but we're not going to like go in there and be like, you can't separate these people. Just like, that's their place. Like if they're going to separate the blacks and the whites, let's operate under that when we go into their city or whatever. But we don't, but then they, you know, didn't believe it. And people were saying that's racist. And I'm thinking, well, it actually seems more like wise to me if you have an agenda of bringing the message to both groups, especially if you're saying that's wrong now, or like, you know, when really quick, when they were going out to places that hadn't heard, you know, about the, you know, the gospel, okay, when there was still going to places that hadn't heard it, like where they were very poor and had superstitious ideas. James, would you take it as kind of racist in a way to like want to uplift the people out of their ignorance and like having these ideas of like one text I read about particular groups, like they were some African tribe or whatever that like, you know, they did a lot of crazy stuff because they just, you know, they were superstitious, right? Like, is it wrong to go and be like, look, their creator, you know, things are happened by laws and stuff, and you know, the kind of early scientific ideas, right? Like, is it wrong to like want to go help uplift those people and then kind of disturb that culture? Or would you think that's a good thing? Like that Christians went in and like, you know, did that? Or how would you look at that?
It depends on the specifics. You know, if you go into a culture that's alien to yours, then they are by some obvious standards more primitive. If you go in there and say, hey, you know, you guys might not know this, because if you observe them and you notice, for example, they're not washing their hands after they use the restroom and then they go prepare food and stuff, then it makes sense to say, you know what, they don't know about germ theory. Let me share this with them, right? Or, you know, if it comes
what
to
about
like,
things though, like where they would, like one guy observed, I was reading because they were missionaries, right? And they were observing this tribe that they were coming to, and they were noticing that they didn't seem to value the lives of their children very well. So like they would fly off the handle in like fits of rage or whatever and like kill their kids. Or like when a mother died, they'd just bury the baby alive with her because the mother was dead, right? Like that's not bad. Or another story, really a really short story. They were the guys that, and I think a lot of atrocities happened when Christians went into other nations, by the way, just to be clear. They didn't do it right in many ways, but like there was a guy, the British were controlling India, you know, the trading companies and stuff. And in Hindu culture, if I don't know if it's just any man or if it's you know, a leader or whatever, but this guy died. This new captain came in, an admiral or whatever, to take over the town, to be in charge. And they were the locals were doing this thing, setting something up, and he was asking what they were doing, and they said, well, this man died, and their culture is that when this, I don't know if it's a particular type of leader or something, or if it's every husband, but because he died, when they went to do the burning where they burned his body, they throw the wife in there. The fire is a custom, right? And so what he did was like, look, you guys can do whatever you want, it's your culture. But he's like, he went and had them set up a bunch of gallows in the town center, and he said, you guys can do what you want to do, it's your city, but any man that participates in throwing that woman in the fire with her husband is going to be hanged on these gallows. And they didn't burn the wife. I think that was good. Do you?
Yeah, prevent people from doing a horrible thing to some other people, sure.
But it's their cultural practices. It's their culture. It's like what they do. It's normal. I mean, I think that's good.
Good to let them?
No, that what he did was wise, I think.
Sure. You know, it's, yeah, you're not going to butcher innocent people on my watch. Now, if the wife decides to go behind my back and throw herself into the fire, well, then what are you going to do, right? But you are not going to drag her kicking and screaming and throw her in that fire.
Absolutely. So I mean, sometimes though, like sometimes that can be over abrasive, right? And there's things where like I get it, but it's like we forget, like the world's come out of a lot of you know, ignorance and poverty.
Sure.
And so now it's easy to like take for granted some of those things that like for most of history and even into the 1800s, especially like when Christians were, a lot of good things spread around the world because of Christian ideas or biblical ideas. And of course, bad things happen too. A lot of bad things happen, but I would just say it's easy to lose sight of that, kind of because it seems so basic and obvious to us. We
Sure.
forget.
Yeah, if I'd been born at those times and in those places and raised that way, probably I'd be just as barbaric and backwards as those people. And it would take somebody that knows better to stumble across that and try to help me understand something better. Sure.
Right on.
Yeah, I'm all for that. But in the meantime, there's just so many people in this world that, going back to the point, like, I don't get what the point of Bibles is or missionary work about religious stuff, right? Like, believe these particular things about Jesus or else. Because if you tell somebody believe this thing about Jesus or else, then you're creating a special situation for them that didn't exist before, right? Because they didn't know. So then if you don't tell them, then they get judged based on the kind of person they are, or at least the kind of person they're capable of being. And I know that most people who've ever lived would much rather be judged based on either the kind of person they are or the kind of person they're capable of being with help, right? Instead of being thrown into some kind of hell or something, or thrown away like trash forever, just because, you heard a religious thing from some religious people, it didn't make sense. And so you didn't accept it, and then you died and got mad about it. Well,
yeah, I don't believe in that sort of way of looking at it, and I know a lot of Christians do. And I actually I try to promote eternal conscious torment. I just think it's a joke. I think it's a misunderstanding, and it's caused a lot of confusion. And it's like, if you're going to teach people, you believe a proposition or God's going to burn you forever, and but He loves you. That's just not. To me, that's not the gospel.
So what happens to people, just your beliefs, what happens to people that do hear the message, whatever the message is, and then they die, but without accepting it, what happens to them?
If they're, to me, what people say they believe and how they operate are connected. So you can say whatever you want. So in other words, kind of like what Jordan Peterson has said before.
Actions speak louder than words.
You're right. Like to some degree, what you actually believe shows in how your life is. Now, at the same time, I want to say, different people have different struggles. So it's kind of like trying to diagnose and say, just eat apricot seeds and you'll be healed. It's like, that doesn't work. It might work for this guy or that guy because he has a certain deficiency, right? So I just kind of like have the idea that I trust God to make those judgments and that He loves people. And the idea of the gospel spreading was really mainly to actually just uplift people and see things in a better way. And God wants that for people. And the tragedy of people that are lost, I think God has rules of engagement that I don't really know how that works, but I think He's operating under a principle of wanting the best for people. And I don't know how that all looks in the end. I just think seems to be an emphasis on a problem with people who don't humble themselves in the right kind of way. But, of course, that gets totally distorted in the whole atheist Christian debate sort of thing, and pride gets involved. But I would just say, I look at God as having the best intentions for people and looking at their circumstances accordingly. I think the wrong Christian, there's people out there giving a Christian message that actually messes people up more in certain circumstances, which is unfortunate. But.
Well, sure. It's unfortunate that they don't know that they're giving people the wrong message. They think they're giving people the right message.
Yeah, I know.
And wouldn't it be great if God came down and said, well, you believe in me as a general idea, and you really, really, really want to make me happy, do the right thing, but you've misunderstood the message. Let me correct you on this so that you can go back out there and get it right, instead of stumbling people and causing more problems than you're helping. It's weird to me that He doesn't show up to do that for the people that are at least trying to connect with Him.
I think He did.
I mean,
I just think people use it how they want to use it, and some people are more innocent with that than others. And I don't know how God's going to judge all that. I would just say,
Well, this goes back to the thing you were saying before, originally in the conversation when I came in the door, about how you get along better with most atheists than you do with most Christians because of how hostile and unreasonable a lot of Christians can be and how judging they can be of other Christians.
They're
But
just
this
scared.
But this is kind of the thing, though. This seems like the same thing that you don't like is the thing that maybe you're accidentally doing. And I'm not trying to be abrasive when I say that, but and I've made the same point before that no matter how skeptical I've seen atheists be or critical I've seen them be about Christians, man, they can't hold a candle to how critical Christians can be of each other. And it just this kind of feels like the same kind of thing, because when a Jehovah's Witness wakes up in the morning, they don't say to themselves, there's this other idea about who God is, and then they picture an idea that matches yours. But I think I'm going to rebel and be a JW instead, because I kind of like being wrong. I kind of like being in an awful cult.
Right. So you're saying you can chalk up everything to just a matter of being ignorant. It's ignorance.
They don't understand. They think they're doing the right thing. They are completely earnest. They are humble. Humility is not their problem. They're willing to lick the biggest boot you can find for them. Humility is not the problem.
Okay, but psychology is a lot more complicated than that, though. I mean, in an ultimate sense. I don't know. Sure. Like being humble isn't the same thing as being a humble person, right? You can act humble or you can be humble, and I don't presume to know when that's the case necessarily with people.
But we could describe humility based on what you mean by it, and no matter what description you give to it. Let's say you give an articulate description of exactly what you mean by humble. My point is that no matter how you articulate that, and even if I perfectly understand you, I'm going to tell you that there are lots and lots of Roman Catholics and Jehovah's Witnesses and all kinds of other theistically inclined God of Abraham-y people that are absolutely humble by your definition of humble, and they're getting it wrong anyways. They don't know they're getting it wrong.
I mean, so I think okay, so I understand what you're saying. So here's the approach to it, right? This is why it is probably as open as it is, where a lot of people, so Jesus' healing is essentially saving people, right? It's a what do you call it, like a double entendre? Like, yes, it's supposed to have it, multiple effects, right?
Spiritual and physical, right?
Sure. Yeah, right. And so those people are healed because of their faith, right? Or the people, or he will heal someone's loved one because of their faith, right? And so all of these different people at the end of the day, right? They have faith in Jesus, right? But here's the kicker, right? And Jaime could probably tell me the exact. I'm sorry, James. I don't remember the verses. I just try to understand them, right? Where you can sit there and you can say you know him, right? You even say you have faith. You say you know Jesus, right? And he will look, and you'll call out his name, and he'll tell you, bro, I don't know you, right? Why?
Yeah.
Sure.
Right? Why would he say that? It's simple, because your life is supposed to be reflective of the faith that you have. So like the examples that you gave, right? You'll find like a lot of churches that are very anti-immigrant, right? And that is antithetical to Jesus's ministry.
Example.
Right?
Kind of. Go ahead.
And so you said kind of.
I mean, I'm just going to grant that for the sake of argument. We can come back to that if you want to.
Like that is completely antithetical, right? Okay. So they are living in a way that is not Christ-like. Yet still they'll go to church every Sunday. They will worship. They would pray and do all of that stuff, right? And the cool thing is that you're being saved is not something you earn. It is it is free. Doesn't matter your circumstance, right?
I'm familiar with it as a doctrine, sure.
Yeah, right. And so and one of the purposes of that is that so that no one would be able to boast, right? But also you'll be held accountable to your actions. So those same Christians, right? The typical Protestant, right? Versus, let's say, the Jehovah's Witness. If a Jehovah's Witness is living in a more Christ-like manner, right, and versus the Protestant who is not, he's essentially a Pharisee, like a Christian Pharisee, so to speak, right, or a legalist or whatever. On the day of judgment,
All right then.
most likely what will probably happen is that more favor will be shown towards the Jehovah's Witness, right? Because their life reflected their faith in Christ versus the Protestant, right? Who decides, I'm just going to kind of do what I want to do because I know I'm saved and God is going to forgive every single sin that I do. I don't need to repent or anything like that. I don't need to actually stop doing the shit that I'm doing. I don't need to live the Christ life, which I'm told to do, right? Because I am saved. Without faith, your works is dead.
I mean,
That's why that's thrown in there.
all right. So the people that you're talking about, they believe they have repented, right? Because they repented of certain things, like they don't do drugs and alcohol anymore, they don't do butt stuff anymore, right? There's
Not all of them. Not all of them. but
well,
yes.
they each have something that they intentionally don't do as a
No,
way.
some of them just say they affirmed a proposition that Jesus died for their sins, and because they believe that for a microsecond that they're going to go to heaven no matter what they do. That's all. Some of them.
Well, anybody that says they believe in repentance has something that they believe they've repented of.
I know they define away repentance sometimes into being just believing in Jesus because you believed supernatural facts for a
Well, I
microsecond.
mean, I hear that from Christians all the time. They say all you have to do is accept that Jesus Christ is your personal Lord and Savior, that He died for you and rose again. Now, the moment they say that, well, then they don't get to add other stipulations later in the fine print to say, oh, but you also have to stop doing a list of things, and
Well,
otherwise.
actually, James, some of them say lordship. It's called that you have to call Jesus Lord is a false gospel even.
I mean, but I don't know. At least to me, at least, it's kind of like the situation with the Pharisees when he told them that he's there to save them from their sins. They obviously lost their shit because they understood what that is implicating, right? But
they're
what
sinners.
pissed them off
Yeah.
even more is that they think that their sins do not matter, as in because they are the chosen people.
Sons
And
of Abraham.
Jesus told them,
No.
yes. Jesus told them, no, that shit don't matter. You are no different than the Gentile down the road. A matter of fact, a Gentile merely believing in me, right, is more has a better chance of being with me than you,
I
who
don't remember
actually
that
know.
verse, but I like the idea of it. I don't remember anything like that in there, but it's difficult for me because there's two conversations. There's the one we're having,
Sure.
and I'm fine with having this conversation. In the context of this conversation, I'm humoring the narrative, right? I'm
Sure.
granting an awful lot of where you guys are coming from and exploring that with you. But
I
it's
think
not.
that means you're saved. I think under some versions of Christianity, you're saved. Then great.
Yeah, I can say that.
Well, welcome, James.
Sure. But
Maynard,
to be clear about this, it's very different than the way that I read those books and understand Christian history and doctrine. Very
oh,
different.
you read the thing? Wow, that's probably your problem there because you actually read it.
I'm sorry to
Am
break
I
it to you, James. You're gonna be seeing Jesus.
Yeah, well, I mean that's what I've been told. So
Guys, I have to go, so I just want to say thanks for having a conversation. It was really fun, and I just wanted to ask, are you Eastern Orthodox? I'm just curious. Or what's your background, if you don't mind telling me, asking? If you don't mind me asking, Mr. Batman.
Me, I don't.
Don't
I
want to
don't
say.
have any. No.
Okay.
I don't have any affiliation with any particular denomination. I think
So what you were
denominations
just
are-
saying, I just wanted to say, I talk about that verse all the time, and I say that to me, those people sound like what the once saved, always saved crowd to me sounds like. Some of them, not all of them. They sound like the Jews thinking they're smothered in Abraham's sauce, and they can't lose their salvation because Anyways, but thanks guys for having me. See you
Yeah,
later.
yeah. See ya.
Okay.
All right. So he had to go, but I do want to continue that thought. I would have preferred to
Sure.
continue it with him here. The Jews of that day and every day before then didn't have that idea about salvation. They weren't trying to get into a heaven. They didn't believe in an afterlife. They didn't even have a hell of any kind. They didn't have the same understanding of what sin even is, let alone what you're supposed to do about it, as Christianity later, was coming up with in the later half of the first century and afterwards. So I don't think it can be correct. I don't think it can
I
be
I
real.
would argue the opposite. They do know. I mean, they have rituals. This is why they have the ritual of the scapegoat,
Sure,
and you
sure.
know, yeah.
But right, so they believed that as a people, if you stop doing a thing that God was mad about, and as long as you're still doing the sacrifices, He forgives you. Right? There's no need for a human sacrifice. The idea of a human sacrifice wasn't part of their religion. They had no allowance for the idea. It never even occurred to them to include it in their religion.
Hmm.
The idea of a God coming and dying, same thing. There was nothing like that. The idea of animal sacrifices being a foreshadow, as a prophetic foreshadow for a permanent sacrifice that would, end the need for all other sacrifices. That was new too. The Jews didn't have that as part of their religion at all. So when we have this Jesus character in New Testament Bible stories talking about sin in a Christian context, they didn't understand sin in that context at all. So he wouldn't have been
So
saying something they already knew.
so yes, did they did have that understanding. I mean, Daniel, Elijah, there are many scriptures that that they could have pulled from at around that time, because Jesus used those same scriptures, right?
Okay.
Um, to re-educate them that yes, I am, right, who is mentioned here, right? So they do know of these
Well,
things,
to be
right?
clear, the Messiah that they expected, the Jewish, I mean, there was more than
Hmm.
one Messiah in Jewish literature, anyways, but the one that was supposed to come and liberate them was supposed to be a military conqueror who would overthrow their oppressors. And
Hmm.
because it didn't happen when Babylon was still the thing, every time there was a new oppressor that they were under, they imagined that's the guy they're going to get liberated from.
Yes.
He was supposed to come and lead a military conquest and establish a Jewish kingdom on earth. And so the Christian ideas
So
about what the Jewish Messiah is supposed to be is not the same as what the Jewish ideas
yeah,
are.
but Jesus never denied any of that. He just said at that particular point, right? He's not there to conquer or destroy Rome. He's there to save people.
Well,
He
he never said he
specifically
wasn't there
said
to
that.
conquer. I don't think he ever said he wasn't there to conquer Rome.
No, let me see if I can find it. I'm pretty sure he did say that, because he did say that he's there to save the people. One second. You can keep talking.
Right. So the idea of being there to save some people is pretty nebulous, pretty open ended. I mean, you can have it mean pretty much anything, right? So I don't know. You can fit that with almost any theology you want to, and you could even fit it in with Jewish ideas. Some guy says he's here to save us within the context of Jewish theology, then it would be understood to me, if he's claiming to be the Messiah, that he's prepared to help you amass an army to overthrow Rome. And if he says he's not there for that, then the idea would be, well, then you're not the promised Messiah. So saving us means you're saving us from something else, and you're going to have to tell us what that is, because we don't know. If you're here to save us from ourselves in terms of we're getting some doctrines wrong, or we're getting the law wrong, well, then that's its own discussion, right? But
Yeah,
that's
because
go ahead.
yeah, because I believe from what I remember, even in I think it was Matthew 22, right? He encouraged he never encouraged them to to go and form to engage in any dissent when it comes to Rome, right? I mean, even the zealot, right?
Right,
Like
right, right.
the zealot, his purpose is to destroy Rome, right? But yet still, he understood and was told that's not what the Messiah is there for. Now, yes, Judas did believe, the that Jesus was also there to, destroy Roman occupation, right? It's not like he didn't believe in the other things, it seems, right? But it seems that, okay, I and I guess it would make sense because that's basically what the Sanhedrin has been pushing for a very long time to maintain hope in that our Messiah will come in and kick the Romans out. But they're not talking about all the other stuff the Messiah is supposed to do. Not only that, there seems to be a situation where the Messiah is supposed to come do one thing and then he does the other thing, right? The other thing is to come, preach and save the people, and he's supposed to be killed, right? And then he will
Well,
come back and he will
so
destroy the Romans, so to
right.
speak.
So according to the leaders in the relevant fields of history, so religious history specific to that part of the world at that time and that specific religious culture, the leaders among in academia as well as the overwhelming
Mhm.
consensus, there are certain things that they agree on that Christians don't agree on, and one of those things is that when the stories were written that we call the Gospels now, and they were written when they were not supposed to be scripture. It was just people writing stuff. It wasn't supposed to be considered like the words of God or anything else when they wrote it. But what happened was that it was post hoc that at the time that there was a bunch of different contenders that were supposed to um, supposedly were the Messiah. No, I'm the Messiah. No, I'm the Messiah. I'm the guy that's going to lead us out of this captivity. No, I am. Right, and so we had a bunch of different Jewish sects, and each one of them had not each one of them, but a lot of them had their own contender. Ours is the guy, and then one
Mhm.
at a time they would fall and fail. Well, this is what the reason why the original inner circle of Jesus would have been disheartened, because he fell and failed. He was not supposed to die for anybody's sins. That wasn't the concept that they'd even heard of before. That concept was written in afterwards, post hoc, to try to rescue a
No,
few.
it wasn't. It was literally
Well,
written in
hold on.
the. Okay,
I'm
go
not.
ahead.
I'm not
Okay.
telling you. I'm not telling you what it was or wasn't.
Oh, okay, okay.
I'm telling you what the scholars say
What the
that it wasn't.
scholars are saying. Okay, I see what you're saying. Fair enough.
And to me, they make a pretty good case. But the thing is, they could be wrong. You could be right, and they could be wrong. But this is one of the things for me is because I'm only going to live on this earth for so long. I don't have enough time left on this earth to jump into that field, master it, go through the exhaustive peer review process so that I know everything that they know, and I've been part of the discussion and discoveries that they've been part of, to get enough up to speed to be able to know if I should think that the leaders in consensus are right or wrong. All I can do is defer to them as long as I think that they're making cogent arguments, because I don't have enough time left to do otherwise in this life. It's too late.
I mean, sure, right? But there's a reason, like kind of like our conversation earlier. There's a reason why you pick specific disciples, especially ones that wrote shit down, right? Because the
Well,
intent is to make whatever teachings, right, available for the masses, right?
well,
And in that you don't have to, you literally do not have to listen to a word a pastor says about Jesus, right? You can go, you can get a Bible, right? Or you can just talk to someone in the congregation, right, to learn about Jesus. And it's not having full knowledge, full knowledge of Jesus is what saves you, right? You can learn the Bible back, front and back, right? But that's not what saves you, right? That's not what makes you in Christ,
right. So
right?
I don't know how you're defining savor, what your doctrines are about it, and you can tell me if you want to. But I mean, I don't know what to do with it except to
I mean,
acknowledge.
the first thing is just the faith part, right? That is the most important thing, right?
Well,
Everyone who got healed, he said, go, it's because of their faith, right? The guy who was literally dying to him next on the cross, right?
Mhm.
He got saved because of his faith.
Well, that's what the stories say.
Okay, I got good news. Something else that the story has to say about itself. In the idea of judgment, which is pretty profoundly, expounded on, the word judgment, even though Christians don't normally, sorry about the noise, even though Christians don't normally treat it this way, James, if you trouble yourself to go and look up that word, it means
Uh-huh.
to discern things. Now you might notice that Christians say you have to decide now, and you were speaking to your longevity or the fact that you won't live forever on this earth, and you're right, of course.
Sure.
That you would have to make a decision on this earth. That makes the word that should have been there sentencing, which is completely the wrong idea. So, despite what you might learn, what you might believe on this earth right now, James Apperson,
Hmm.
faced with the judgment, you would be in a very, very different situation and have necessary information to be able to make an accurate decision at the time. So, I have no less hope for you than I do for myself, for precisely that reason. But I'm an old guy and I have to work tomorrow, which
Yeah,
means
yeah.
I'm asking you guys to wrap it up. And
Sure, sure.
please do shill your channel or whatever you're doing, and you please use my platform to do that.
All right, you go ahead.
I mean, I don't have a channel to. Well, I do have a channel, but just nothing interesting on there. Just stupid gaming shit.
Fair.
But I want to shill Richard's channel. Thank you again, Richard, for having us.
Thank you.
Everyone who comes here to engage, please use the interactions that we've in today's episode as an example as to how we can engage in difficult conversation in a meaningful way that is, that doesn't involve name calling or any form of disrespect, right?
That's right,
Um,
bitches.
right? Richard's channel is special. If you respect him, then you will engage in a way that is reflective of that respect. So that's what I want to show. Behave yourselves.
Yeah, I appreciate that. All right, so I do have a channel, and I thought about streaming today, and when I saw this was that Richard Madsen was on, I'm like, yeah, I'll go hang out at Richard's instead. So maybe tomorrow I'll stream. So if you just look up my name, James Apperson, you can find it. Right now it's called A Persona Non Grata. It's a play on my last name, Apperson, and
That's awesome.
and also because I don't really fit into the niches that I run with. I run with a lot of atheists and a lot of secular humanists and liberal social justice warriors. And even though I agree with a lot of things that they say, man, they're just not my people. And I kind of wanted them to be, and it doesn't work, right? I like them, and I agree with a lot of things that they say, and I get where they're coming from, but I don't have a people, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but I just this is why I decided to play on my last name with, the persona non grata idea, because I'm always on the outside looking, and always, no matter where I go. So in the meantime, I want to thank Richard as well for being a host, and thank my interlocutors or fellow panel persons for having good discussions, and hopefully we can continue these discussions in the near future and see where they go.
Well, I'm going to try to remember my thorn in my side, and I'm going to try to not take the compliment. Birds of a feather flock together, and try to treat you each as your own individual and not a reflection of me. But I have to say that you people come here is a big compliment to me personally, and you have added to my experience, and I can never repay you. So thank you all very much.
Is that because you're broke?
Yeah, that's it. That's why.
All
All right, guys. That's the end of tonight's show. We'll do another one as soon as I can. Thank you all for coming. I'm not going to mention all your names, but know that you are in my mind and you are in my heart, and I deeply appreciate it. Until such time that we're all great friends together in heaven. Peace.
Peace.